Please silence your cell phones, hold all sidebar conversations to a minimum, and we will get started with People Process Progress in 3, 2, 1. Hey everybody, thanks for coming back to the People Process Progress podcast. This is episode 76, The Wit and Wisdom of the Little Gym That Could, with Andrew Smith and Daniel Frank. And if Andrew Smith's name sounds familiar, it should. He was on episode 8 last February, where we talked about starting a Jiu-Jitsu revolution and learned about Revolution BJJ, which we'll touch on again as well today. Andrew, thanks for coming back to the show.
Kevin, thanks a ton for having me and for having Daniel as well.
Absolutely, yep. And we have Daniel Frank. He's one of the other instructors there at Revolution BJJ, and a big part of what we'll talk about. And the name of this episode is Wit and Wisdom, and it has to do with a book about Jiu-Jitsu we'll get into. So Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast as well.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So like I said, Andrew, if we can get a kind of a brief background, because I really want folks to go back and listen to that episode 8. We really get into your background and how Revolution started, and we'll touch on that a little bit here, more from kind of how you all and with Daniel adapted as you grew. But can you kind of catch folks up kind of briefly, your background and get going, and then we'll learn more about you as well, Daniel.
Sure. So I'm a third-degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. Been training for, I guess, a little over 20 years, depending on how you count that, 20-something. Started doing judo before I started with Jiu-Jitsu, although the two sort of like blurred quickly together in my mind. And I also wrestled in high school, so I guess I've sort of been a grappler for a really long time. That's been a part of sort of who I am, who I identify with. And Revolution BJJ was started in 2006. And it was a very small venture at first, and it just kind of blew up over the years and grew. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Judo, jiu-jitsu, typically a grappling background, I think would be fair to say. And I've been running Revolution BJJ since 2006 with partners, with friends. It's become a more involved enterprise, to say the least.
No doubt, and I'm super thankful for listeners. I know I've talked about it, and I think we touched on it when we spoke last year. That's where I started Jiu-Jitsu in the intro program there. It's a great environment for folks that are listening in the Richmond area. Definitely get in touch with them and check it out. And I know a few years into starting Revolution, Daniel joined you, and Daniel, your kind of journey to Revolution a bit different than Andrew's, both geographically, with your international kind of start. Can you kind of let the listeners know? Where'd you grow up? I know you traveled internationally. That's where you started Jiu-Jitsu, and kind of walk us down that path that got you to Revolution BJJ.
I started Jiu-Jitsu when I was 24 years old. So I didn't have a background in wrestling in high school or anything like that. I was actually teaching English over in South Korea, and I answered an ad in the newspaper about taking jiu-jitsu classes. And since I was kind of bored, I went, checked it out, and then I stuck with it. And I was teaching jiu-jitsu over there by the time I was a purple belt. Got to brown belt over there, and then decided to move back to the United States. And I kind of threw a dart at the board, and it landed on Richmond. And then once I got here, Revolution was in 2012 still kind of the biggest gym in the area, or at least the one that I checked out first. And then it just kind of all worked out, and I've been here since 2012, almost 10 years now.
That's awesome. And just a reference for some of the younger listeners, a newspaper was a printed piece of paper where we used to get the news. Very different world today. That is cool. And you were a teacher of not just jiu-jitsu. You taught, and this is again in the book too, some good background. So you taught English in Korea, right? And then taught jiu-jitsu. Did your English teaching skills help you, and have they helped you in teaching jiu-jitsu?
Oh yeah, of course. When I was learning to become a teacher at university, there were a ton of classes that you must take to be a teacher, classroom management, all sorts of classes like that, which you might not actively think about it when you go into lesson planning for a jiu-jitsu class, but it definitely helps to keep on time, keep the class flowing, make sure everybody's learning. So everything I learned from teaching high school to teaching kindergarten and elementary has helped me teaching jiu-jitsu classes.
I would imagine it seems that process, that we like to talk about here is, looking at kind of like we talked about before we got started, the outline for this episode. I would imagine the outline for teaching, a class of students in a school setting, similar to having an outline of, and I think I've seen you doing this, when I was at Revolution, for that class and that day. How do you choose to focus the lesson plan? Is it something kind of between you and Andrew and other instructors that over the years you kind of know the building blocks you want to get to, week to week for the group of students that are there, and then kind of, I guess, a two-parter. And then do you ever change that on the fly depending on who shows up for class that day?
Well, here at Revolution, we have different levels of classes. So the intro class that you had started with, Kevin, we have for gi and no gi. And we do have a set curriculum for that, which when I started, Andrew walked me through the process of the curriculum we had in place, gave me pointers on things to improve upon. And it is a long internship process, but one that makes you a better teacher. And then when we leave the intro classes, we have our level 2 classes that are broken down into 20 minutes on the feet, 20 minutes on the ground, and 20 minutes rolling. And we do have themes of the month here so that with an abundance of instructors here, the students will still get whatever the theme of the month is, and then they'll get to see different aspects. So maybe the instructor is a little more wrestling orientated, judo orientated, or ground orientated, and that way all of our students can find what they like and continue to go with it. And then, of course, if you have somebody who is learning disabled, physically disabled, or somebody who just is a little slow in getting a technique, you have to improvise and find a way to make everybody learn.
That's excellent. Andrew, is that something as each instructor, or I guess to kind of rephrase that, so that outline or that internship Daniel mentioned for new instructors coming in, or as you're bringing instructors up, is that something that you developed with other instructors like Trey or Rudy or other people at Revolution?
Well, that's a good question, and it's definitely everything like that, every system that we put in place, every process, to use the title of this podcast, involves multiple people, involves a lot of brains. I tend to enjoy thinking in systems for whatever reason, so I'll usually start organizing a process like that into kind of what I think of as a sketch, and then share the information with Daniel, share it with Trey, share it with whomever. I would say, Rudy really was very, very, very helpful in his brief time with us, because he had helped another gym scale up, his gym, M3 in California, that he had owned before he came and visited us. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but we went from 50 to 100 people to 300 people in a very, very short period of time. And when I visited Rudy, I was just blown away by all that stuff. But also a lot of it was he had a really good sense of organization. And so that sort of controlled some of the chaos. And of course, the idea with scaling up any kind of business, which I had some experience with US grappling too. I understood that organization was really, really important. So I guess my brain's been in that gear for a really long time, but it is definitely like a collaborative process, because we're taking a look at what should the students be learning at its core, right? That's the question that we're asking, is how can we help them learn? What method should we use? What message do we want? These are all really important cultural questions, in addition to a logistical challenge that we have to face. So we all tend to come together on bigger conversations. It makes sense to have one person sort of take the lead with organization, but then we all circle back up and take a look at it. So it's definitely always this kind of collaborative process.
Yeah, and that process, as you mentioned, the growth, and again, really the source content that's kind of key in a lot of these. One, just our conversation, but also is in that book. So again, folks that are listening, Wit and Wisdom, the little engine that could, available on Amazon. We give an early plug just to give people reference. But to your point about the growth too, and looking at the book from 06 and a few years after that, having 30 students, and then 100, 200, pushing 400, and then hearing this process of that structure. and the community that you mentioned, which is so interesting, both I think as a member of the jiu-jitsu community, but even for other folks, I guess they won't really understand, but just the mix of people that show up daily, right? Mix of lifestyles, politics, religion, whatever. And everybody just really gets, there's not a lot of nonsense when you're in jiu-jitsu, probably not time for it and for what you're focused on. What do you think helped build the community over those years and help it grow so quickly in addition to that process and that structure? What do you think has helped Revolution grow so much and be so really well respected and accepted in not just the Richmond area, but, in the country?
I think, Daniel, why don't you start with this, because you have a different perspective from me coming in 2012. And I think we were kind of already gearing up toward hyper growth mode at that point, right?
Yeah, I think when I came in 2012, we may have been just shy of 100 students, between 75 and 100. And when we reached our peak, we were over 400 pre-COVID. But I think what accelerated that growth was all of us learning exactly what we wanted to do and what our common goal was, and then going out and achieving it. And with personalities like Andrew's, Trey Martin's, myself, Rudy when he was here, we were all very positive about jiu-jitsu. We're very professional about jiu-jitsu. And we really care about our students and what we want to teach them, how we would like them to go out and represent our academy, locally or nationally or internationally. And then also what we would like to do as instructors. I really feel like having a professional jiu-jitsu gym rather than it being a hobby, like something we do after our normal job, really helps us to keep people interested in jiu-jitsu and look at us as someone who is an authority on the subject and somebody who could definitely help them.
Yeah, that's really well said. The consistency is the thing that I think is the most important aspect, and also setting and meeting expectations, I'll say, is the thing that maybe differentiates us from what other gyms will do, because I think a lot of the time you will look at a gym schedule and it sort of, it tells you we have a jiu-jitsu class during this time slot. It doesn't really tell you anything else. What we try to do is, because we've scaled up and we've got the ability to do different types of classes at the same time, we've got 3 different matted areas that we can use at any given time. We try to accommodate a much more specific subset of students each time, rather than saying this is kind of a catch-all. If you're trying to screw in something, you want a screwdriver. You don't really want like a Swiss Army knife with 500 different pieces that you have to kind of like hunt through and find the screwdriver, right? So sometimes, for instance, showing somebody a lot less stuff is way better, in the beginning if somebody's really new. So that's kind of what our maybe our intro program tries to do, a little bit of that. Although we have a lot of material in the intro program, we try to give little bite-sized pieces that people can digest, and it's all around a central theme and everything. But on the other hand, you have, a purple, brown, or a black belt coming into a class to train. They're going to obviously have very different needs. So instead of just having a rubber stamp kind of catch-all class, we're able to say, okay, well, brand new beginners to jiu-jitsu, this is the class for you. People who've been training for, a year, this is the class for you. People who've been training for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, this is what you would enjoy doing. So there are other ways that we break it down too, but experience is a pretty common one, and it's a pretty transparent one that just about anybody will relate to if you've been in a gym where you're taking a class that isn't really the class for you, but it's the class that you can take. So I think that based on our experiences, and this is something that Trey and I have talked about for a long, long time, we've always tried to make it the gym that we would want to train in, right? So we're able to, it's really simple. It's not some mind-blowing thing, but we put ourselves in the shoes of the students. We say, what would they want? What would make sense here based on our previous interactions as consumers of jiu-jitsu, right? And just flipping it around and saying what would make it better. That's what we're always trying to do. Now it's complicated, and we always have to think about things beyond just When you move one thing around, we're actually working on, our schedule is constantly evolving because of the pandemic, and just in general, it's always kind of evolving. But like, that's one of the things that I'm working on right now. And if we move one class around, that means that probably 25 or 30 other classes might also have to move too, for instance. And we have to think about accommodating lots and lots of different types of people. So this is getting into some of the nuts and bolts of the logistics of what we have to do as the business grows. It becomes more and more complicated. We can serve more people, and that's a huge pro for both of us. But there are some challenges that arise that you just don't have when you run a gym with 30, 40, or 50 people. You know, when you have several hundred, it's just a completely different animal, and it requires a lot of different types of minds to work together.
That and that fits into what made me think of that is, you know, the ripple effect, knowing if I change this, it's going to affect things downstream. And maybe in a, you know, my day job as a project manager, knowing clearly, like, don't fall in love with your plan. Or when I did public safety incident management stuff, you know, as soon as you write the plan, it's out of date. Being comfortable with the dynamic nature of just life, I guess, but particularly for you all running a business of jiu-jitsu, knowing if I change this, it affects all these different things. You know, and then having the intent overall that, you know, we want to make this a place that I would want to train at, is just, I think, a great outline for success. And clearly with the growth, that's a great, you know, for me to think of comparison, you know, when you plan new widgets or whatever, but thinking about it in the aspect of, you know, jiu-jitsu in the gym. And you mentioned again, and, you know, everyone's pretty familiar as far as COVID happening. But to that point, that was a huge impact, particularly for fitness and particularly for martial arts and jiu-jitsu gyms. Some to the detriment of gyms completely, where they're not coming back, unfortunately. How did you all manage that? Like, I remember, and that's also some skills we can learn from the book too, is, you know, sweeping and mopping and wiping things down. That was just a constant. So it seemed your infection control was pretty on point already, but of course it goes, you know, to the nth degree with, you know, either being shut down for a little bit or bringing folks back. How was that process as gym owners and instructors there of trying to get the business back open? And I know it's kind of an open-ended question, so I guess, you know, what were the decision points to start letting people come back in that you all processed?
Daniel, you want to start with this one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we might as well start from the top. When March 2020 began, let's say March 1st, 2020, we were just kind of rolling along, doing our thing. Intro classes were going well. 2020 was going well. And then by, I believe, March 14th is the day we shut down. And we shut down pretty early compared to other gyms locally, regionally, or even in the country. And we didn't really have much expectations as to how long we'd be shut down. And we had to follow what we were hearing day to day. Luckily, we do a good job of getting together once a week to discussing what's happening in the gym, what our plans are, and where we go. So we followed guidance of the state, of the CDC. We are large proponents of following the science. And from that point on, we listened to what was happening, what was being suggested. And then by July or mid-July, we were able to open our doors to solo classes, and we started from there. And Andrew, you can pick it up from there if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a really good summary. Obviously, we were interested in the same challenges that most gym owners face, which was to keep the students safe and through the pandemic. But then, and not only the students, but also the community. And that was a pretty big concern of ours, to be sure that we weren't creating some kind of a super spreader event. And so that's why we operated essentially the way that we did with, but it wasn't an easy challenge for us at all, right? Because we do have this need to sort of keep our doors open if we can, but the safety came first for us in the discussions, for sure. and it dominated the discussions. Like how can we do this safely? So we put a great deal of energy into it over the last year, and especially Daniel, who's there physically for the classes right now. I'm still running online classes and staying at home, but I'll be back in the gym relatively soon here. But anyway, the cleanliness, the hygiene culture that you touched on a little bit, Kevin, is something that I want to call attention to too, because I think this has been very deeply embedded in our culture for a long, long time. Before, I've been a bit more cognizant of skin infections in jiu-jitsu than most other gym owners used to be. And this is important to understand that jiu-jitsu used to be really, really, really gross, like even way grosser than it is now.
Right.
And if you go back to like the 90s, I mean, you would find the best academies in the world were holes in the wall where it was just disgusting black mold growing, or, you look at the mats and they haven't been cleaned in a really, really long time. Dirt. Jiu-jitsu was just gross and dirty, and you were a particular type of person if you did it. You were probably comfortable with skin infections. You just didn't care about that kind of stuff. You were more like, Pigpen than any other Peanuts character at that point.
So, do you think part of that, not necessarily being comfortable, but that skin infection awareness came from wrestling as well? Because I know that's, skin infections very similar, right? Is a concern there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a wrestler, and let's say you're a high school wrestler and you get a skin infection, it can keep you from being able to compete, rightfully so, and it can keep you from being able to train. And if you're obsessed with this stuff, at an early age, I think Trey and I had that ingrained in us in a relatively early age. Trey wrestled more than I did when he was growing up, and got a lot of experience with that culture. I don't know if it's necessarily from that or if it's just kind of getting feedback over the years from our students,
Gotcha.
Because I've certainly evolved in my thinking a lot over the last, 20 some years in terms of cleanliness and hygiene. But I think that for us, it was just very obvious that, like, if we wanted to have a gym with more than 30 people, we had to really, really, really be on point about skin infections. I mean, if you think about, like, if you have a very small club and you have an outbreak of something, you're like, okay, well, I mean, you could talk to every individual who's in the club and they can decide if they want to keep doing this stuff or whatever. If you have a multitude of people participating, it doesn't make any sense to be that way at all. You have to be extremely vigilant. So we've always been vigilant with regard to skin infections, and that's never going to change. But it was just a natural extension moving into the pandemic. The only difference is that where with ringworm, if you give it to somebody, they might get itchy and hate you. But if you give somebody, COVID, obviously the repercussions are considerably worse. So we had to do basically what we were already doing and just kind of amplify and modify it. So that's sort of, it informed our decision-making process every step of the way for sure. And I think most business owners understand really well that this is a very, very difficult time for businesses, and our business was certainly no exception to it. We had very difficult decisions to make. We're still making difficult decisions as we go along, just trying to really get the best of what we can in terms of accommodating the students while not jeopardizing safety and any more than is normally acceptable in jiu-jitsu anyway, because obviously we're all out there risking ourselves. It's just that it's a little different when you're risking other people too and the community. And that definitely amplifies our thought process a great deal and informs what kind of decisions we make.
Yep. Yeah. And you mentioned, jiu-jitsu not being any grosser than it already is. And for folks that don't practice jiu-jitsu, and even just in my short time comparatively, and again, you all mentioned this in the book, you're sweating probably like you've never sweat before all over each other. When you are sweeping after class, it's pretty gross, of what you sweep and comes up, and then mop it, which is cool, which kills everything. So it's, and that's the nature of grappling and jiu-jitsu, right? You're going to be sweaty, you're going to be all over each other. And so an industry that I guess, should be completely on point. And again, from me having a public health background, I super appreciate it. I was also in the Navy, so I appreciated the mopping phase. I was like, oh, I can kind of keep honing my skills. And I know, Daniel, that's a judgment area that you have provided and ranked kind of folks can work toward a higher ranking in their sweeping and swabbing skills.
Definitely, I put stripes on mops for skilled moppers.
Nice. Nice. I didn't see the stripes. That's awesome though. And on the hygiene thing, and some of this comes from kind of getting into, sharing folks with the book and more of that discussion, some tips, and we'll get into these too, and great guidance in a few different of the chapters or stories. But in particular, what new folks need to know, and folks that are listening to this episode or go back and listen to episode 8 or any other ones where I, get nerdy on jiu-jitsu in a few episodes as well. Hygiene, fingernails, take a shower, wash your gi, wash everything. I assume you all are in the wash your belt. You won't lose your jiu-jitsu skills if you don't wash your belt club.
Yeah, we try to focus that on people. There is no such thing as mojo. Wash your belt.
Right. Right on. What are some? Have you had many challenges with that? Is that just the nature of, again? I've been practicing a couple years, a little over 2 years, you all much longer. So in the time that you have seen that as much of a problem as far as, constantly, is that just the nature of jiu-jitsu? There's always going to be the stinky gi person. There's always going to be this other kind of hygiene, don't cut their nails. Is that just the nature of the beast?
Well, we've strived very, very hard to not have the stinky gi person at all in our gym. And I think we've been pretty successful. No system is ever perfect, but the thing that we've done, that we focused really hard on, that I think a lot of people sort of miss, is that we would lay out a policy and then we would focus on making sure it was adopted. And on the surface that sounds super, super simple, but I think most people who do a policy, particularly small business owners, they kind of just put the policy out there. They're like, that's what we're doing, and then they get confused as to why people aren't actually doing it. We spend a great deal of time anytime we roll out a policy just making sure that it actually becomes a part of our culture. And when it does, it's embedded and it kind of takes care of itself. So, man, if you're running a jiu-jitsu school and you happen to be listening to this right now, if you involve your students in the process of cleaning and you encourage them and you explain why it's such an important process, the odds are pretty good that they're going to help you sort of police the culture yourself, right? So getting people to help with the floor, it's something that is viewed positively. Like, you get social points for volunteering to help with the mats, and you get social points for wearing a clean gi. You don't get like negative a million if you smell bad when you come in, Yeah. I think that's important to have that self-policing culture as the system continues to grow larger, just thinking in terms of how can we get the system to take care of itself. And when we have that, that's like the keys to the castle, right? Being able to, you don't have to have people hovering over people's shoulder if the culture is just so encouraging of the right kinds of behavior that you're trying to get.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, and you all are great at that because overall, in jiu-jitsu or other hard stuff, but obviously talking about jiu-jitsu is, I think, to me, what I saw is your old student going through the hardship of a jiu-jitsu class, get your butt kicked, or if you do whatever, you're doing it together with the other students. So it seemed more apt to jump up, and you already shared hardship. Let's share the cleanup. That builds the teamwork that then I feel like is related to your point, or both you in agreement with wanting to jump in because you all built the culture. I think that's one of the great attractions of, any hard thing you do as a group, and particularly jiu-jitsu, it bonds folks that were just trying to choke and break things on each other, to include the cleanup afterwards. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I think that's why you fit in with us pretty well, Kevin. You have a certain sense of responsibility, personal and for other people as well. And I think that's really the end of the day. If we get the right kinds of students in there who are interested in and understand what our goals are, then we're going to be much better off for it. Also, like, being able to inform people, communicate as to why we're doing certain things is incredibly important. Because if you're just like, well, you can't change your gi top. You can't just take your gi top off if you're not wearing a rash guard underneath it out here at the gym, right? We have changing rooms for that. If you don't explain, well, think about what it's going to look like if somebody pokes their head in and there's a dude walking around without his shirt on.
Right. Which is interesting, too, because there's, at least videos I've seen or other stuff, a lot of people that grapple shirtless, what or under their gi. Don't I'm a huge rash guard wearer, obviously in no gi, but under my gi all the time for that as well. And just it's interesting the different culture aspect. Had y'all ever been involved in that? Hello.
Sorry, say again, Kevin.
Well, that's right. So I've seen a lot, or whether it's videos or matches or something, and there are grapplers out there that often are shirtless. Is that kind of an old school kind of thing? Because I never thought to do that, right? In matches and stuff, it's just interesting when I see that. I'm like, why are you doing that? But
yeah, it was much more commonly accepted. Like when I would say that when Daniel, you first started doing jiu-jitsu, there were probably people who were competing shirtless, right? Still.
Yeah, I mean, I started in 2002 or 3, and maybe by a year I was competing regularly. But I think back then, mid 2000s, there's still a lot of the macho mentality where it's like, I'm going to come out and I'm going to show everybody my muscles. But we know with jiu-jitsu, like, muscles are good, but they're not going to lead to a victory every time. So it would always bewildered me. Like, why are you going to show everybody you're the biggest muscle man in the world? And then this small Mikey Musumeci type person will leg lock you. And it's kind of embarrassing to show everybody that you're the strongest guy in the world. And this tiny guy just ankle locked you. And then, of course, the hygiene comes into it. I don't want to go out there and grapple with a big sweaty guy who is covered in hair and doesn't want to put a shirt on.
Right. Yeah, the same age. When you talk about muscles and fitness is another thing. We talk about in kind of the tips to the dude thing too as well, Daniel. And I know you've shared a lot, particularly last year, which is awesome. Workouts to keep folks in shape as they were off or the gym was closed. I see a lot, whether it's on Reddit, and Andrew, thanks again we chatted last year. I got a lot more involved in Reddit, which made a difference, I think, in the podcast. So thanks for that tip. I'd never really gotten into it a whole lot, but Daniel, for the fitness piece of it, you see a lot of posted questions, especially from newer folks like me. Oh, I'm going to wait to get into jiu-jitsu until I'm in better shape.
Yeah.
Well,
Definitely.
What should people do, really?
Well, there's a lot of fitness stuff that I like to do, but it's because I'm very into fitness. And I know a lot of people are, and then I also know that a lot of people are not. Mm-hmm. But I believe in one of the myths about jiu-jitsu, it's covered in the book, and Andrew put it, is a lot of people say, well, I need to get into shape before I start jiu-jitsu, which is not necessary. Jiu-jitsu will do enough to get you into shape. Anything you do outside of that, be it push-ups by yourself at home, pull-ups. I like to work with a Bulgarian bag. Some people do CrossFit, swim. Those things are all great. And they might help with jiu-jitsu. They might make you be able to roll a little bit longer. You might be able to complete a sweep because you have a little bit more in your tank. But if you are not as strong as the next opponent, you find a way to make it work. And so I really love fitness and I believe it helps. But for those people that do not find the time or fitness is not for them, jiu-jitsu can still definitely be for them.
That's a great point and good perspective from your experience. With one thing, and this kind of speaks to your advice for blue belts and just generally being an older student. So I'm always kind of fatherly, mentory, so to speak, of kind of reminding new folks that come in and just like I did, use all their speed and strength or whatever they have, and then they're exhausted after like a minute. And knowing, hey, there's just a reminder, or there's like you're in shape, but then there's like jujitsu in shape, which is complement each other to your point. But it is amazing. You could go, to your point, you can go run a mile in however long, super fast, and then you come in and you're done within the first 30 seconds or a minute of
and we see that in our intro courses all the time. Is a lot of beginners rely on what they know, be it speed or strength, and they could be the most fit person in the world doing CrossFit, and jiu-jitsu is a different beast. Like you're going to find yourself exhausted, and you're going to, especially during white, blue, and even purple belt, things start to change over time where you're like, oh, this was extremely difficult when I was a one stripe white belt, and now I find this extremely easy as a 2-stripe brown belt.
That's amazing. And that both, I guess, your physical, your mental, and your kind of muscle memory at that point when you hit brown belt, which that's another thing to me, that seeing the levels, right, especially all the levels, it's just amazing to me that muscle memory repetition separates so greatly the practitioners of jiu-jitsu based on their skill level. So thinking about, I can't really fathom thinking about at the brown belt level how easy it is to do this stuff that's so hard for me now. Mm-hmm. And especially when I'm rolling with a brown belt or a black belt, I'm like, it's weird mentally to think about how easy it is for somebody else that's at higher of a level than me to do the things they are, as if I know zero. And I know I'm still new, but it's just amazing to me every time I roll in the gym.
Well, Kevin, you should understand that that's how brand new white belts view you, right? So the whole thing is there's this relative expertise, which, at Revolution BJJ, we have incredibly high standards for who gets to teach. And Daniel already alluded to the training process. It's like one of the longest training processes I've ever heard of for anything. Let me take that back. It's not medical school, but we're talking like more than a year, maybe up to 2 years depending on the programs. But it's like, I've always kind of regarded that as like being the right way to go, though, because you take your time and you can really get legit experts. But having said that, like a blue belt can help a white belt, right? So that's one of the things that we're always cognizant of with the intro classes, in particular, is having more experienced people work with newer people insofar as they're comfortable. Now, these are things that we have to kind of think through now that the pandemic has taught us some lessons, right? Like, going forward, people might regard switching partners more frequently as being something they don't especially want to do, right? And so those are the kind of micro decisions that we still have to kind of make going forward. But we still want to utilize that expert kind of relative expert status thing, Even a white belt who's been around the block a couple times is going to be able to help another person out who's brand new. So we try to do that with a variety of different partners at our gym.
Yeah, and that's another great perspective. I think we touched on when we talked last year of the kind of immediacy of jiu-jitsu, right? Where you're certainly not, jumping up to winning a tournament after you've been there a couple months, but it's a huge difference from day one, like enormous difference. And including one of the things, and the one thing that always stuck out to me, especially when you see people's eyes get big, when you all would walk us through, okay, this is called the guard, which is an instant icebreaker. Like, I would imagine you see folks, Daniel, and just most of my intro time, and I think class time we spent. Do you see a lot of folks where they get kind of deer in the headlights, or that's kind of, you can tell, like, yeah, they're not going to stay because they're just not comfortable just being that close to folks?
Well, I feel like we start our intro program, be it gi or no gi, with the guard position to start, because you will spend a majority of your jiu-jitsu career either playing or passing guard. And I think our instructors are pretty good at explaining to everybody that jiu-jitsu is different from other martial arts, traditional martial arts you've seen where people are on the feet throwing punches and kicks. We explain jiu-jitsu is mostly a ground martial art, and you're going to find yourself on your back. It is not a disadvantageous position. And if you can close your legs around them, this might feel awkward in your first day, but this is jiu-jitsu. And I think that tends to break the ice a little bit, and people get accustomed to it. And then I found the best way to get people accustomed to it is we just don't talk about it too much. We go right into what we're doing. And that kind of demonstrates to the students that as long as I'm paying attention to the moves that we are learning, then this isn't as awkward as it feels in the first seconds. You're like, okay, well, I understand this. And they move right past it.
That's a great point. If it's not an issue, it's not an issue. Because it's just like, yep, that's it. Here we go. Here's the next thing.
Yeah. And I definitely feel like, even though not everybody has seen the UFC or MMA, it has definitely become more mainstream that people can see something in jiu-jitsu. And even if they don't know jiu-jitsu, they'll say, oh, I've seen that. I've seen the UFC on TV. So they understand, oh, okay, this is a grappling or a fighting position. and they could work from there.
That's a great point, which, I didn't think about at all of just the exposure of that these days, and including the one that just happened where there was a ton of grappling in it, which is pretty cool to see. But yeah, the influence of the UFC. Do you all get that a lot as far as folks that show up for that intro class? That's where they found the interest?
I think a lot of people, if they do sign up and we ask them where their interest was, a lot of people say that they've seen the UFC. I know specifically, and I've answered the question a lot, or my peers have answered it a lot. They love to say that their interest in jiu-jitsu started with watching Royce Gracie win in 1993.
Right.
I didn't see that until maybe 2000 on VHSs. And that's not what got me into jiu-jitsu. But looking back on it, I feel like a lot of jiu-jitsu people got into jiu-jitsu watching UFC, even though it was a jiu-jitsu practitioner doing mixed martial arts. But then again, the UFC was started by jiu-jitsu practitioners.
Gotcha. Yeah, I figure you heard that from me between Joe Rogan podcast, Jocko podcast, and then I also had the VHS player. So watch those, which was pretty amazing. I had zero idea what I was looking at. And which is pretty amazing, but it's interesting to hear your perspective on folks that was their inspiration, but time wise, but it's the biggest call out, I guess, the kind of that tipping point or seeing it and that one art, jiu-jitsu against strikers and just seemed kind of Wild Westy, the first ones. So it was interesting, and I was noting this because I watched last night on just how much more structured in medical checks and all that kind of stuff they do now. So it sounds like kind of the evolution of jiu-jitsu getting, cleanliness and all that kind of stuff, and then the safety of mixed martial arts also is a good evolution.
Yep, and you definitely see that there's a lot of people who come in very interested in MMA or UFC. What always got me about it is I could win a match without throwing a punch. That's fantastic. I could win a match without hurting my opponent. I could put him into an arm lock and he decides to tap out. That's always interested me. I know Damian Maia said that while he was in the UFC, he won a couple matches without throwing a single punch, and he really emphasized, like, this is what it's all about.
That's a great point and segue too on, because a couple of things. One, one or the other, in the whether it's someone that's sitting on the couch or someone that actually trains that is looking at it of, oh, that would never work in the street, or the gym or the sport versus out in the street. Whereas to the point like we talked about, well, if you watch the UFC, they're doing the core of even what I can recognize as the core moves that you all teach us, right? You're like, oh, they're just way better at it, clearly. At that, but also the recommendation that you all do talk about is mixing it up, right? So whether it's to help get out of maybe a slump, and particularly the timing that I'm at, I'm a blue belt, the blues, as they say, if you're at a belt for a long time, or you just burn out, or whatever belt you're at, but mixing up and adding in some striking. Have you all trained in that much? And I know you all do Muay Thai and have other things. And do you recommend that to other folks?
Well, I've done some Muay Thai, probably trained consistently about 4 years. When I first started a Muay Thai program with some dudes like for Revolution, and I dabbled a little before that, but I actually got some consistent training for a while with that. And when Trey and I first started looking at merging Revolution BJJ together with his gym and rebranding it as one entity. That was the time when I started getting involved with the program that Trey had going on as well. So I was trying to be consistent and be a good student. But for me, it was always kind of a labor of love, I guess. Like, I knew that it was good for me to do as a martial artist, to be well-rounded. But I never fell in love with it like I did with jiu-jitsu, So I didn't really, as I got a little older, your bandwidth tends to go down a little, where maybe before training 11, 12, 13 times a week was.
Well, then I'll pick up where when I was a a blue belt, like Andrew was saying, I did some very amateur MMA and some Muay Thai training to help me prepare for that, which I loved at the time. Since then, I've taken judo classes, wrestling classes, which I think really round out the game. But by the time I was halfway through blue belt, I really wanted to focus on getting my black belt in jiu-jitsu. And I think when I was a white belt, I was training 2, possibly 3 times a week. And by the time I got my blue belt, like I really decided this is what I want to do with my life. So I need to train as much as possible, every single day. And I had the ambition of being a world champ, and I've gone to the world championships, the Pan Americans and all of that.
Oh, wow. So really your drive when you got into it, not just to get better jiu-jitsu and advance to the next thing, but to make it your profession, kicked in as you started to progress. What was the tempo when you were 2 to 3 times a week? And then as you moved up and built your skill, how often were you training?
Well, at white belt, that 2 to 3 times a week was mostly due to the fact that I didn't have a lot of time to do it. And then as I got my blue belt, I was able to start changing my schedule around to accommodate my jiu-jitsu. And then if I was preparing for the world championships, I would definitely think about training all day. And there were certain points where I would put a pause on my job, getting ready for the world championships, and I would be working out or training jiu-jitsu a majority of the day, where I would just come home, go to sleep, to wake up and do it the next day. Obviously you can't do that forever, but if I had an 8-week training camp for the Worlds, it is definitely hard to do, but it is rewarding.
No doubt that, and that's a good thing you guys talk about too. And I've heard as well, just kind of the life factor affecting your jiu-jitsu. And do you find that most folks that train as much as you did, that volume, are like you, right? They were younger. They may not have a family yet. And so they're just really focused into that. Have you seen that a lot with the students that have come through Revolution or other folks you've trained with like you that were, shooting for, titles and really just up in their game like that?
Yeah, definitely. For the casual jiu-jitsu practitioner all the way to the professional, life happens. So you get older, more things start to happen in your life. You have another job, you have a family, you have children, you have responsibilities, which might take away the training all the time. And I could say maybe as I was preparing to fight for the world championships, I was a little selfish with my time. It was all about my training and my goals. And now, I don't have the luxury to be selfish with my time. I have to help run this business. I have to take care of others. I have to make sure that all of our students are learning jiu-jitsu. So I can't just take a week off and go to the Anaheim Open or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll say, as a former student there of yours, we definitely felt it at tournaments too, where you make sure, and that's another great thing that you've done. You did for me, and I think I see in general with the other Revolution instructors, of being there at the edge of the mat for their students, and even the last time when I'd already moved. But that's such a great thing, so you can really get that feel of the interest and that. What I call leaders' intent. Our intent is for you all to be successful, and you're doing that by making sure that that there's a mentor for your students, and it seems at every level. And that seemed kind of like a standard that you all did at. I've only been to the U.S. grappling tournaments, but is that something that you do for anyone that competes out of Revolution? Is you make sure they have an instructor or a mentor that can help kind of talk them or be there to coach them?
We try to. I know that one of our students, Dylan Martin, just competed today at the Nogi Pan Americans. We weren't able to send a coach with him, but Dylan has competed for a long time and has always been a great competitor, to the point where he doesn't really need a coach. He knows what he's doing. He knows the training that he's gone under. And some people really thrive with coaches and some don't. I know that I've competed before where Andrew was in my corner and I told him, hey, please go help somebody else. Like, Like I don't really respond to coaching well because I have my game plan and I know when to make changes and when to improvise. But then some people are very good and need a coach to tell them what to do, when to do it. So it varies a lot.
That makes sense. And for both of you and Andrew, you both competed a whole lot. And would be interested to hear from each of you, and sticking with you, Daniel, first. Is that something, to your point, when you're competing that regularly and is at every level, how's the challenge to kind of hear guidance from the coach, and then actually process it and then actually do it, right? And do you see that when you're trying to coach other folks too?
Well, I've seen a lot where I've been a referee and I've been a coach and I've been a competitor. And I've seen it from different points of view. And there's some coaches that will go out there and they will just scream their head off at children, at adults, anybody who is their student. And it doesn't seem to change. Like that is their coaching style. And it doesn't seem to matter if it works or not. They are just screaming instructions out. And I don't feel that is the best way to help your students. A lot of the students that I've worked with, if they could hear a nice calm voice telling them to control their breathing, be calm, look for openings, that really helps them out rather than specifically saying, grab the wrist, now sit up and go for a Kimura, because the other participant is listening to them too. So if I just feed them a move, the other person's going to block it. But if I tell them to be patient, be calm, and look for opportunities, then I feel like I kind of rein my students like fight or flight in, and they can now calm down and start looking for the openings that they know they can do. But on the other side, I know that I competed at a super fight once where John Bagels Telford was in my corner. And in overtime with a minute to go, I needed a sweep. And he wasn't exactly telling me what to do, but his motivation in telling me to go kind of allowed me to get that sweep. It was the extra like motivation I needed to get there. So, there's a variety of ways to coach. Sometimes you need to be out there and like forceful and yelling at a person to get them motivated. But I feel like most of the times you just have to rely on what you've taught them beforehand and find a way for them to be calm and listen and do what they've been trained to do.
That's a great perspective. And the first example you gave of the yelling always reminds me of, and I have 4 boys. My oldest is a teenager and they play sports, of the parent, whichever one it is, just screaming as if they're trying to build a professional sports player and their child's like 6 playing soccer. Like it's amazing. Do you see that from parents at jiu-jitsu tournaments? Is it essentially a thing in the sports world, but also happens in jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a big thing in the jiu-jitsu world where I've had parents who might be the nicest people in the world, but they something clicks when their son or daughter is out there and they're just screaming. And it might not be negative. It might be that they are just very excited that their son or daughter is out there competing. But then I've also had parents yell at me for tapping for their child, which has always irked me. Because I'm out there trying to protect their child and they're upset that I stopped their child from getting hurt.
Is that usually parents that don't also train? Or is it a mix?
I'd say it would be a healthy mix.
Gotcha.
Like, some parents that do train have that competitive nature and they understand the desire to win. But then we've also, the referees and I have talked about parents who see their child undermount and they're just yelling at their child, get up. And you want to go put that child or the parent undermount and be like, how about you get up? Right. Show me how you'd get up.
It's just so easy in their mind. I mean, I get it in perspective, and that's one of the things too for new folks and from looking at the book and reminders of things y'all taught is there's an expectation that people have that they can do things that they really can't, especially somebody that's got more training than them, or just again that training in muscle memory. So it's interesting to hear, parents yelling that, thinking, oh, well, I would just get up or I would do this, which probably also is like, and we've all seen tons of memes, right? When somebody's watching the UFC fight and I wouldn't do that. I would just do this. Like having no idea. Like I understand someone that's better than me, whether it's a lower belt or higher or whatever, how hard that is. But thinking about like a high level competitors like your level or like watching the UFC, having an appreciation for how high of a skill set they have compared to the average person walking on the street. And I think a lot of people walking on the street think they can just snap to that high skill set, like flip a switch.
Yeah.
Like, little perspective there. And I think too that is for folks going into, the intro program at Revolution or wherever they may train, of just, and you all talk about this as well, of being comfortable, like not knowing things and knowing you're going to lose a lot.
Just I think that is also very important. Sometimes a white belt will go out there in a tournament and you, as a coach, you'd love to see your students win all the time. And sometimes you're like, well, I think this person needs to lose a match here or there just to understand the other side of the coin. Like you're not going to be 400-0. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. And what really matters is how you take your wins and how you take your losses, what you learn from them. And medals are great, but at the end of the day, like all of my medals are in a shoebox. So, I feel like some people really take competitions or accomplishments a little too seriously. I think my greatest accomplishment in jiu-jitsu was getting my belt and being a good teacher. And that's what I enjoy striving and continuing to do.
That's a great perspective, to your point, and having, moved a couple years ago and just, when you go through your house and you clean things up and you have like a medal from, your grappling tournament, like runs you do and everything. And to your point, like the physical things you get from a tournament or event or whatever end up in a box or, they're not critical things, but it seems that, people do get so attached to that, both in jiu-jitsu and other places. It's interesting to hear your perspective on that. And the belt focus is something else that you all talk about and I've read about and has happened certainly to me, of also accepting that it's totally part of the deal that a lower belt is going to tap a higher belt at some point or like regularly.
Yeah. Andrew, I believe in one of his early articles, mentions that as a myth, like a higher belt will never tap to a lower belt.
Yep.
And it happens. And I mean, it happens all the time when you might have a high level competitor who comes in and maybe because of work, he hasn't slept well in 2 days and he's just flow rolling, and some really amped up blue belt is like, I'm training hard today. And luckily a lot of people, if you get tapped out, you're like, oh, tap, you got me. Good job. Right. And then, unfortunately some people get real upset about that. At our gym here, we try to curb that pretty quickly and keep it all in perspective as, hey, we are all learning here. We're all getting better. And fortunately, a lot of our students do a great job of following that.
Yeah, have you ever heard the term mat justice, Kevin?
Yeah, I have, yes.
It's not exactly a healthy term. I think people tend to think in terms of the way to correct bad behavior is to beat people up. And I'm like, does that work well with children? Let's
right.
Look at scientific studies on it. Doesn't work well with adults. It doesn't really work well with anybody to have just a punitive thing, especially if you don't even explain why you're pissed at somebody, And so you'll see, like, if you're visiting a gym in particular, you'll see a black belt beating the crap out of, or a purple belt, whatever, the mat enforcer beating up a white belt. And it's like that white belt doesn't have any clue why they're being beat up right now.
Right.
There's this assumption that everybody knows what you're thinking and what's in your head and sees things the same way that you do. And they're just kind of being, they're just being a dick. But that's not usually the case. Usually there's something else going on there, I think.
Yeah. With what you just said, Andrew, and then Daniel, what you mentioned too, it seems like, often when you're on the mats, when you're in a class, that's all you you focus on that mostly, right? Because you have to, because it's pretty intense. But the factors of the outside world, particularly when you have more responsibility and things like that, absolutely affect the outcome of a roll or a drill session or whatever it seems. And do you see, because there's a lot of folks at Revolution that compete as well, and when you get into the color belts and the time at each belt, do you see that variation between, and especially kind of, lower belt tap and higher belt, or just in general how that goes, the variation between those who compete and those who don't? And do you think kind of because of the time you're at each, particularly from blue to purple, and then beyond that being a factor on just the variation you could have within each belt color seems, is like the variation of people, I guess, right? So you see kind of a whole melting pot of people within each belt that has a factor, it seems, on, who taps who on a given day.
Daniel, you want to start this one? I have some thoughts there too.
Go ahead, Andrew. I'll just follow up.
All right. Well, so, we've talked a lot about this over the years. The first thing to think about is just kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, tying it together. The submission at the gym isn't the goal, right? The goal is to become better as a student and to learn. And in a similar way, the belt is not the goal. Like for us, the belt is, we do a good job, I think, of differentiating between what's a blue belt and what's a purple belt. And our standards, it's kind of a rising tide of standards to where a few years from now, it will probably be tougher, or at least you'll probably have to be better, let's just say more effective, in order to get X belt, right? And that's just kind of the nature of the way things go. When I was starting out training, like blue belts were like gods. They were like heroes. And they were so much worse than blue belts today,
Oh, gotcha.
Not all blue belts, but some, right?
Yeah.
And so the some blue belts thing, you've got this competitor, you mentioned this as well, the competitor versus the not competitor types, right? And I mean, I think at a certain point, the knowledge is the thing that you really have to measure, like effectiveness. We talk about whether somebody is a good cultural fit, and that is actually very important as to whether they're going to progress, because if somebody just is not good for the gym, then they don't belong. The second thing is, whether they're actually using good technique when they roll, like whether they're, flowing and stuff like that, or whether it's just kind of them bullying people, right? You can get so far with just you.
I think we lost you again.
All right. Well, once Andrew comes back, I feel like what he's trying to say, and I've noticed this when I visited Access Academy in Tokyo, Japan a lot, was there are some, I'd say a purple belt. There we go.
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep. We can now, yep.
But yeah, between white and purple belt, there's a big gulf at our academy because of the way that we've sort of set things up. We also have a lot longer time than many other gyms will have, before you get, say, your blue belt. I think a lot of places will give you a blue belt in a year, right? For us, it's much, much higher than that. We just think that there's more that kind of goes into it. And it's just, it's more arbitrary for us, but it goes back to that sort of rising tide thing, which is, I very much believe the way that it should be. The skill level on average should continue to rise up over time as we get more and more information. Just like you can do more stuff now on a computer than you could 20 years ago, right? Much, much more effectively. We have this other kind of technology that's continuing to evolve, and its information is able to spread much more rapidly now.
Is that kind of evolution in the higher standard? And you even mentioned it before, where, blue belts from a while ago, I guess either weren't as good or didn't have the knowledge as they do today, so to speak. Is that just the evolution of trial and error through the moves and innovators and bringing more, stuff into jiu-jitsu that's kind of, had jiu-jitsu mature over the few decades?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Part of it is also, like, from our perspective, from Revolution BJJ in particular, is we understand a lot better how to teach people and how to give them what they need to get better. So gotcha. I think that's, like, for example, understanding that you have to sort of, your class has to be fun, right? It can't just be, if you're a dictator and you're saying, well, how do I get, these people from white to black belt in the relatively shortest amount of time I can. And, you would say, well, I've got them under my purview, under my thumb. So day one is like, okay, we're going to do break falls. Guess what day 10 is? It's still break fall. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you would go a very different route. But so understanding that there's a certain degree of enthusiasm and excitement. And if you can get the students excited and enthusiastic, then they're going to want to learn on their own. That's been something that's also been something that's helped us out. I don't know if I wouldn't say it's secret sauce for us in particular. I think a lot of other instructors understand that and other gyms understand it, but it's definitely something that we've tried to deeply embed in the way that we design classes and the way that we teach them and run them.
That's interesting. And Daniel, for you, have you seen similar with, kind of the higher standards and helping people kind of achieve the higher skill set, and then the variation that you've seen within the belts, even let alone between the belt levels?
Yeah, definitely. Like I was saying, in Japan, I remember going there and seeing middle-aged men and women who were purple belts, who were not like the active purple belt competitors. And there's a wide gap between both practitioners, but they both might be 3-stripe purple belts. And I think it comes down to knowledge of what you're doing as your specific body type, as your specific jiu-jitsu personality. Like you might not be a competitor, but you know just as much as you come in and train. And then it does make it difficult because every gym and every owner or instructor of a gym is different. So everybody has different standards. It would definitely help to have some sort of unification of standards, but it's very difficult to do that on a national or even an international scale. And I'm not one for tests or anything like that. I feel like it should come down to the instructors knowing, like, hey, this person is learning well, doing well, is a great part of the academy and is helping all the other students. I feel like that has a lot to do with it also.
Yeah, I would imagine as a new guy Googling, how do I get to the next level? You find out there that there are pretty formal tests. You have to do these techniques. We do like I forget what they call it. You go against a bunch of people, but then also folks, like, I think that sounds like what you described, where it's really totally the instructor's discretion of looking at, okay, is this person at the level where they should be for X belt, or they can apply these, whether it's a new person or it's experience or something like that. Has that variation been in jiu-jitsu, and I guess in other martial arts? I did taekwondo, I was way younger, so I have no perspective from then. But have you seen that where that's just been part of kind of jiu-jitsu for as long as you all have been part of it, the variation in how instructors kind of judge and grade and whether they use a list or not?
It's been that way for me the whole time. Definitely.
Yeah, I feel like for different gyms, there's different standards, but luckily at our academy here, Andrew, Trey, myself will always talk about different students and the progress we've seen and where we see them going. And luckily for the readers of our book, I wrote a couple articles on being a blue belt, on being a purple belt, on being a brown belt, where I gave my perspective of, if you're that belt, or at least when I was there, like the things that I felt were very important and were necessary.
Yeah, and those, again, encourage folks to go to Amazon, check that out, and check those out. I, in particular, of course, called out the blue belt stuff, being proud and humble, competing, being a leader. To y'all's point, I think that we touched on a little bit before. Even though you're new, you're not as new as someone else. Learn, and then not being afraid to lose. Which, one thing that I have found is the tapping out to someone because, it hurts you, you're not getting choked out or whatever, is different than, my own mental that I quit on myself, not because I got caught, but, did I prep for that class like we talked about before? Did you, were you tired because you worked too long or whatever? More the things that I could control that I didn't prep well for, knowing I'm going for an hour and a half to something extremely hard. And I think that point that you had on being a blue belt, don't be afraid to lose, like we talked about earlier, is just, I think it's a mindset you just have to keep, right? And a difference between right? Losing in the gym with folks that are your teammates that you're trying to get better with and with your instructor that's going to help you is different than giving up. Like if you unfortunately did get in an altercation with somebody, right? It's a very different mindset. So I wanted to touch on, we talked about the belts and then really get into as well, the book and y'all's vision for the book, the intent and really what you want folks to take away from this. So maybe before we get, because I want to get recommendations from each of you, one each kind of for each belt, but Andrew first, and then we'll come to you, Daniel. What was your thought for this book and what do you want folks to take away from it?
Well, we definitely initially set out to put together a book that collected sort of these stories, narratives, advice, whatever that we had before. And that was initially what we were thinking. But along the editing process, it was brought to my attention by somebody who helped edit the book that it might be a really good idea to hyperlink stuff to BJJ Path to make it more of an interactive experience. So when I sort of realized that we could do that, I sort of threw myself into this a little bit. I really enjoyed referencing whenever there was some technique, like, so you're going through the book, you're reading about a certain thing that Daniel went through in his life, let's say, and it's like it mentions spider guard or something, and you're not really familiar with what spider guard is, so you could click on the link to spider guard and it'll take you to a page where there's video of Daniel or me or somebody that we know doing that. So I think that adds a layer to it that maybe isn't there.
I think we lost you again.
Well, Andrew did a fantastic job of those hyperlinks. Because when we did start the book, it was articles that we had written and we organized them into different chapters. You with us, Andrew?
Yeah, just to interject really quick while I have a moment of talking through the interactive nature of the book, where you can click on a technique that's outlined in the book that's mentioned, like what's a triangle, and it'll take you to BJJ Path where you can actually watch videos of me or Daniel doing the technique or somebody like us showing it. I think that's the thing that I really want to call attention to as much as I can on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I was saying, Andrew spent a lot of time on this. He spent a lot of time on BJJ Path, and I feel like it is a great resource, and it is something different where you can get a book on Kindle, and then you could have links. So you could read about the spider guard, and then you could go watch videos on it. You could read a tutorial. I think it's a great addition to the book.
It is definitely, because it's helpful to read the articles and things, but then to, which I would imagine is kind of a teaching technique, right? Where you see one kind of do one, teach one, but you can read about it, then you can see it done. Then you can, if you're going to class the next day or later or whenever, go, oh, you know what, I'm going to try that move or that escape. I know I did that with one of the other BJJ Path videos before the book. I think it was a Renegade Choke escape. And I was like, oh, that's pretty awesome. And magically it worked. So for me, magically meaning because I remembered it or anything. But yeah, that interactive nature, especially now, so many people online. And I think to varying degrees of comfort in getting back into the gym or not getting back into the gym, having a book that has great history, great advice, and to me, it's jiu-jitsu specific, but it's not really just jiu-jitsu, right? There's great leadership advice, stuff you get from the benefits, the confidence, cardio, character type stuff, all in there, and being able to link that to BJJ Path. And we touched on this a bit, I think, last year where we spoke too, but BJJ Path being a huge online encyclopedia of videos, and you all have been very active in the putting videos out, on YouTube of techniques, which is excellent. You've been doing that for a while, so to have them pulled together in BJJ Path and then connected to this book, the Wit and Wisdom of the Little Gym That Could, is amazing. And folks, again, can get like real-time feedback from it, right? Using those techniques and things like that. It's pretty awesome. And for the folks, since we're talking about it, it's bjjpath.com, right? That folks can go to check out the path.
That's right. Yeah, it's free. BJJ Path is 100% free. If people want to, pay a monthly subscription fee, they're welcome to do it. Just sort of similar to what Patreon does, but it's not necessary. We're just looking to get more people involved and to use BJJ Path as a platform for the book too.
That's excellent. That's excellent. How was that process? And Daniel was an English teacher, former English teacher. Did you have to do a lot of editing?
Well, luckily, Andrew and I did quite a bit of editing with the articles to begin with. And then when we put them together, like right now, I have a bunch of the materials in front of me where we went through countless edits, had a bunch of different people editing for us. And then as one of us got busy, another one picked it up, and we just kind of worked as a team until the finished product came out. So Andrew put a ton of work into it. I put a ton of work into it. Everybody who helped us put a ton of work into it. And now we're pretty satisfied that we put out a great product, and people can now not only read about jiu-jitsu, learn about jiu-jitsu. Like you said, there's other things in this book. If you want to find out the best Hall and Oates songs to roll to, you could definitely do that with this book.
That my wife and I were making dinner yesterday, and it was somebody covered the song, so unfortunately it wasn't them, but it was one of their songs. They came on yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, that's in the book." I haven't looked at it again, so it's amazing. How did you get into Hall and Oates and jiu-jitsu to pair those up?
Well, I think it comes from the culture, like Andrew said, that we have here. Some gyms you'll go in that is just blaring heavy metal all the time, and not that heavy metal is bad to listen to while doing jiu-jitsu, but if it is just constant aggressive music, then the practitioners are going to start to feel that and roll that way. If a lot of times we'll put yacht rock on, which is nice and smooth, and you'll notice that in the movements and how people are rolling. I always personally, reggae is my favorite type of music, and I'll listen to that a majority of the time that I'm teaching classes, and I feel it is very calming, and it makes people roll while nice and calm and thinking about what they're doing. And Hall and Oates, I mean, I could listen to Hall and Oates all day and do great jiu-jitsu.
Nice. It is interesting seeing the tempo of and the expressions on faces, and the tempo changes, the music changes. It kind of makes me think of we're conditioned like Pavlov's dogs a little bit, but I guess it's just some music gets your adrenaline going and some chills you out, so you're more flowy.
Yeah.
Definitely have reggae in my head and the orange mat memories from rolling there at Revolution. We touched on earlier U.S. grappling, and you all, and the great tournament that was, or if I didn't say that before, I'll say that, and I've definitely talked to other folks as well. And this year, y'all made a pretty big decision to not do that. Clearly, COVID a factor in that decision and discussion, right? And people's comfort, I would imagine, on tournaments, or how did you all come to that decision about U.S. grappling?
Well, so it was a very difficult and uncertain decision, to be sure, and absolutely the pandemic was a major factor in it. The tournament business is tough, though. I think a lot of people look out there and they say, "Man, these people are making a killing because they do some mental math in their heads." But they're almost always going to underestimate how much everything costs and overestimate how much money we're actually getting. Wow. Because I can say it was a very, very thankless and difficult job. I was delighted to be able to do it because I got to do jiu-jitsu and travel around, and that was amazing to me. Even if it was just doing something like in the service of jiu-jitsu, like an administrative thing. But I mean, as a promoter or whatever, I would still jump out there and compete, which might or might not be the right decision to make but I did, and I felt comfortable enough with the unbiased nature of U.S. grappling to be able to do that. I mean, U.S. grappling, for folks that never got to compete, it was an amazing organization. And I don't say that because I was involved in creating it. I mean, I say it because there were some just terrific people that were very thoughtful and caring about the community. and wanted to make it such a great experience for people. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily always rewarded by a free market, especially in a pandemic, right? And so that was just something that we couldn't really foresee coming along. It was rough. It was devastating, without question. It meant a lot to me to be able to be a part of that organization for so long, and to get to reconnect with a lot of people that I had known for a long time, and also to just establish new relationships with a new generation of people.
Yeah, it was awesome, and I appreciate the opportunity to have been part of it, to see you all, and that was a big thing. So for students that competed at that regularly, is the focus now look at kind of organizations that are still doing that? Because you're right, the logistics of thinking of what venues will or won't allow X number of people in them, what areas are open. So in addition to you all having to make that tough decision for the reasons that you said, all the folks that attended that, right, as competitors and folks that went to watch, now, have you had folks that want to redirect, or meaning that, they're just ready to look for where should I go now? And a lot of questions about, other organizations, or folks kind of still stepping in. This kind of speaks to, I guess, kind of the reopening, right? As we're seeing kind of the door open a bit more, or a lot more really. How's the tempo of former competitors or competitors now, looking from folks that you all teach at your gym?
Well, I feel there's some competitors that would like to train at or compete at the highest levels, which right now means IBJJF, or if they really wanted to go to ADCC or anything like that. And they could definitely do that, and they've probably been doing that for a while. The more local, regional, there's some organizations out there. Some are good, some are not so good. Those tend to be kind of hit or miss. You're going to have to go there, experience it, and find the ones that you like and the ones that you don't like. And then know that maybe when you go to one tournament, you might have a bad experience, but that might not be every experience you have there. At least that's what I found competing myself. With US grappling, I don't think I ever had a bad experience as a competitor, as a referee, overall. And like Andrew said, I loved everybody that I got to work with there, people working behind the tables, people taking care of brackets and everything. All the referees I worked with and all the competitors that I competed against were great. So I feel like the desire is still out there. There's still super fights like Toro Cup that are going to be open. We've thought about the possibilities of having in-house tournaments here. So the future is wide open. It is just it's a tough business to go into and continue to do well at, because I do see some organizations cutting a lot of corners in order to either save money or do A, B, or C. And unfortunately, sometimes that isn't the right thing for the competitors or the customer.
And for those competitors, and I think you've both written about this in the book and different articles, where competition and Revolution in particular seems to always have folks at tournaments and competing regularly. Is that something that you recommend for practitioners to do at least one or two times, like in their whole jiu-jitsu career, or should you try and compete like at each belt level to kind of as like a gauge or an experience? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good one, Kevin. That's a tough one to answer, right?
Yeah.
Because you got different types of people, and I think probably that I'm gonna definitely let Daniel answer this one, but I think it's gonna some of the answer, if I had to guess, will involve that very thing, that sometimes it's sort of not that easy of a thing to answer, and everybody has different priorities and stuff like that.
True. I feel that it's not necessary for everybody to compete, but a lot of times competing does make you understand the techniques or when to use those techniques a lot better, which techniques work really well for you and which ones do not, because some people while competing might be great with their triangle game while other people might be great with their takedowns. I always found the most valuable thing I feel that a competition gave a competitor was overcoming the anxiety and nervousness of competition, because that's the first major hurdle that you have to do. Actually, second. I think the first major hurdle is signing up and committing to doing a tournament. Mm-hmm. And then when you do that, overcoming those nerves of, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And then daytime when you're like, oh, my match is up in like 20 minutes. And then some people that's tough and some people thrive on it. So it is definitely a personal choice.
There are folks who might get that experience of going out there and competing and overcoming the anxiety, the stress, all those things, and that benefits them every bit as much as if they, competed 100 times, right? Because maybe they can draw on that for kind of inspiration in life. That's a really good thing to bring up, Daniel. Like when people compete, it's not, did my jiu-jitsu work is nice to know. Testing it out is good to know, but like overcoming the fundamental human challenge that you're facing of this is very strange and my body is saying don't do this. And then your mind has to kind of overcome that. I think that is a really huge thing that people can walk away with. Perhaps people will not compete at all that train our gym. Plenty of people will never compete who train with us. That's always been the case. But I would say more than half want to at least go out there once and just kind of see what it's about. And of course, as you mentioned, Kevin, we've fostered a pretty strong encouragement of competitions if people want to go out and compete. Like Daniel said, it's tougher now because U.S. grappling was such an easy home for the students to just recommend it. So that's part of the reason why we're looking at like an in-house tournament that might be safe if we can do it. And safety is the biggest consideration for us. But we want the experience also to be very encouraging and positive for people. So that's sort of really good to kind of call out and to say that the lessons that you get from jiu-jitsu aren't always jiu-jitsu lessons. They can actually help you out in life to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's from my experience, and I've only done 2 tournaments, but I've driven a fire engine. Like I've done some stuff that, would get you amped up, and the adrenaline dump you get when you step onto the mat at a tournament is, you all told me about it. Other folks, Bagels, told me about it. I was like, okay. And then you're like, whoa, where did all that energy go that I just had 2 minutes ago? It's pretty amazing, but it is helpful, right? Because that perspective too on the speed aspect of it, folks are amped up to get those medals that they may put in a box down the road, but it's way different than just hanging out with your pal that you see 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? In the gym, which is also, I think, a good reality that seems to be related to perhaps the intensity if someone really, got into it on the street, so to speak, but maybe you're not both wearing gis on the street, but you know what I mean? But it's amazing because folks really want to win when they're in the tournament setting. Like it's a totally different level, but I think well worth it because in that perspective of, okay, this is how you do or don't handle it, right? This is what I did or didn't do to prep. And to touch on it again, it has to do with both on the mat and off the mat kind of stuff. And I want to, which is cool, and pick y'all's brain. Cool to have you all here. Is to get a piece of advice from each of you for folks at each belt level, and for folks listening, there's way more than these kind of quick hits in the book. So again, check it out. It's on Amazon. Again, it's the Wit and Wisdom of the Little Gym That Could. It's interactive, but I wanted to, from each of you. And maybe as we go to each belt, maybe Daniel go and then Andrew go. One piece of advice, kind of a quick elevator tip, would you give white belts? Daniel.
I think white belts, it's be open-minded. Try to be a blank slate. So even if you have previous experience in wrestling or taekwondo or whatever martial art, come in like you're brand new.
Well, that's really good. Relax and have fun is maybe another way to put a similar thing. Hopefully, if you're relaxed, you're more receptive to the information that's coming in. You're not fighting it. So, relax, have a good time. Remember that this is supposed to be fun. I think that maybe is helpful for any belt level, but especially at white belt.
Yeah, definitely, because it's easy to not relax when you're struggling and always catching a beat down, so to speak. So for the folks that stick it out and make it to their first color belt for those blue belts, what piece of advice would you give them, Daniel?
I'd say for blue belt, learn everything. You're basically the jiu-jitsu sponge. You don't have to be perfect at it, and you probably won't be, but as long as you go out there and you learn, or at least see it, the newest squid guard or worm guard or closed guard, that you could say, okay, I know what this is, because then later on you'll have time to perfect it. So kind of go out there, see everything.
How about you, Andrew, for blue belts?
I would just add, you are responsible for your own training. So at blue belt, it's really important that you sort of take responsibility and you start to say, I should make the time for these classes, things of that nature. I think when you first start out at white belt, we try to sort of give people something like a template for a schedule. Like our intro program, for example, we'll do a couple of days a week. It might be Tuesday, Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And so people get into that habit of training 2 times a week at 5:30 p.m. as a minimum baseline. Sometimes they add more classes, but they're almost always available for that. So being responsibility for your own improvement, your own training, keeping track of it. Daniel talks about a lot of this kind of stuff in the book, methods to do this with, journaling and taking notes and things of that nature. But that's the ultimate, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own improvement, and at blue belt is the right time, I think, to start really thinking about that.
Yeah, they journaling it, and Daniel mentioned that when I was there. Tim Manning, who I train under here, same thing. It is great. Just in general, I actually now have a podcast journal, a jiu-jitsu journal, and then like my personal one, a mix of that. But that and Daniel that shared, like, map out your kind of strategy, right? Like, I'm going to go from this move to these 2 moves, or something like that, has been really helpful to get that. It's interesting, and I talked to Deborah Vogue, who's a crisis navigation person, a few episodes back, and journaling has come up, I think, probably in almost everyone I've spoken with. Just it seems to be that mental to hand to paper connection, right? And mapping through that seems to be helpful in so many different aspects of life. So it's interesting to, again, and great to hear that reinforced. So the purple belt, right, for you all and in general is what you could start to consider advanced belt, right? Is that accurate for the purple belt?
I'd say so. Purple belt is so wide open. Like a lot of times I've considered purple belts to be the teenagers of jiu-jitsu, where they can go out and they could do the fanciest moves in the world and they could screw them up, and there's not a lot of repercussions to it. So purple belts love to go out flying into barambolos and not really have any direction. But eventually towards the end of purple belt, you'd like to see some direction. So I think for purple belt, I'd say the most important advice I would give them is start to be a leader in your academy.
And through mentoring and teaching classes, do you start to bring purple belts in to help, like, assistant teach?
Well, purple belts, we will let them here start the intern process.
Wow.
We'll have them helping with the kids program. But not just that, maybe they don't want to be teachers, but maybe they can definitely be great partners and help others. So I feel like purple belt is the time where a lot of students can be of great assistance helping others.
Thoughts for the purple belt, Andrew?
Well, I think the gym leadership is amazing and important. And of course, Daniel and I are on the same wavelength with that. So that's a really good to get that out of the way and say that. But I would also say, like, don't forget fundamentals. I think that people, when they get purple belt, they tend to be excited about as Daniel kind of alluded to, the different kinds of new hotness, new exciting stuff. But, at the end of the day, like, if I'm sitting on my butt and I grab your foot and push you over, I get on top the same way as if I do a super slick berimbolo type setup where I scramble and end up on top. Fundamentals are super duper important, and they're very effective. And understanding the fundamentals is going to help a lot. So purple belt is a great time to refocus on the fundamentals too. People it's so easy to go the other way with it. You don't really have to encourage people that much to explore their games or try to find a style or anything like that, in my view. But you do have to encourage them to recenter on the fundamentals and just not neglect them, because it's going to help them out so much in the next few years.
Did y'all find that in your competitions and success, or even just your growth, you just kind of, because in jiu-jitsu and I think in other things in project management, what are these core things you can do? These, for me, these foundational, basically from all the different processes I've learned of, response or projects or whatever, there's like 5 things you can break down. And you mentioned that, Andrew, the fundamentals in jiu-jitsu. Have you found yourself coming back to those, like, in the heat of a match or something like that, where that's really what helps kind of drive success at the higher levels, or at all levels, I guess?
Yeah, well, so I haven't competed since 2015 or so, right? So for me, when I was competing all the time, fundamentals made a dramatic difference, right? Whoever understood it, but you also had to be plugged into a modern jiu-jitsu game. And so, of course, when I say purple belts should study basics, I don't mean they should only study basics or at the exclusion of the other stuff at all, just to be 100% clear. But, the longer I do jiu-jitsu, the more I appreciate really, really simple stuff that is effective. I alluded to grabbing somebody's foot and pushing them over. That's literally my favorite way to sweep somebody. It has quite some time. If they're leaning backward and I just push them over, I use no energy to get on top, or very little energy. I probably grabbed onto them as they were falling, and I used that energy to come up on top. What's better if I spend 100 hours getting you, my job is to go downstairs and bring up pieces of mail to you. Well, there's only one in there, and I wait until the last minute. I go and I get it and I bring it up to you. Or if I go back and forth and I spend 100 hours trying to do the same thing. I think that using less energy to do a thing is better, generally speaking, is more desirable, and it's absolutely what we point to with jiu-jitsu, even though my example there was terrible. But you can imagine, it doesn't make it. It's something like spending way more energy doing it isn't really the goal, right? Spending less energy needs to be our goal. So thinking about that effectiveness and just simplicity is a way that you become more effective, I think, rather than trying to think in terms of extremely complex stuff.
Yeah, I feel like being very efficient is very important.
Is that something you see, as we get to kind of brown belts, where that efficiency you've to your point, learn, soak stuff in, but you've reached out to new things. You've made it to purple. Oops, sorry, I think we had lost you for a second.
Sorry about that. I'm done. I've talked enough. I'll get carried away. Talking about this stuff.
Well, at brown belt, I feel like blue and purple, you've done a good job of trying to learn everything and seeing the possibilities. And then at brown belt, you have to really start to laser focus on your timing of when you should be doing these things to make your jiu-jitsu more efficient. And that's very important when you get up to black belt, is because black belt is going to be a wide range. Like my first year at black belt, I would compete and then I'd go against someone like a Nakapan who has had a black belt longer than I've been doing jiu-jitsu. So if I am not as efficient and precise with my jiu-jitsu, I'm just going to get murdered out there. And so I feel like at brown belt, it's about starting to rein everything in and focusing on the things that are important. And then the other aspect at brown belt is to be patient, because when I got my brown belt, maybe a year in, I thought I was ready for black belt. And fortunately, I moved to the States, did quite a bit of learning here. And even though I thought I may have been ready for a black belt earlier, I feel like the longer I spent at brown belt, the better it was for me in the long run.
That's something too, I think we may have touched on earlier, but that thought of, do a lot of students have the thought when they're at a certain belt that they think they're ready for the next belt? I imagine that's an interesting question for you all as instructors, right? Walking, folks through that.
for us, it's almost like a KPI, a key performance indicator. We don't want lots and lots of students to come up with those questions. It's not that we're not opposed to talking to students about belt progression or anything like that, but like what we want is for people not to be utterly perplexed by it, and definitely not to think that they should be the next belt up. So like, I think it takes a lot of humility and self-awareness in order to not ask those questions. Although everybody asks them internally at a point, right? But we don't want it to spread to the culture of like, well, I think I'm ready for this next belt, and what's going on? Why am I not promoted? And we've lost students over the years because of that exact question. And it happens, right? Mm-hmm. People have anxiety and nervousness and self-doubt and all that kind of stuff. We're not here to contribute to the self-doubt at all. That's not our goal. We want to help make you a better martial artist, make you, accomplish your goals and stuff like that. So for us, that's the fewer people who are, openly confused, at least, let's say, the better.
I feel like a lot of people, you trust us with your jiu-jitsu training, trust us with your promotions too. Like we're gonna know when to promote you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost kind of I wouldn't necessarily say insulting because we understand where the questions are coming from. Mm-hmm. But insulting is not a bad word to use either to describe it. Where, I mean, if your doctor says, "Man, you got to eat less cholesterol," well, you're going to try to drop your cholesterol values, and we're telling you, well, you need a little more time at blue belt. It doesn't mean that we think you suck or something. It's just there's a little more that's needed, a little more time to put in, and we're the actual experts that you presumably pay money to learn from, so not allowing us to be the mentors, I think is a big mistake that we'd like for students to avoid over time.
That's a great point, and something you all mentioned too in the book is, you can only be that color belt once it changes, like you can't go back, and the expectation changes when your belt changes, both for all the students around you, right, and yourself. So it sounds like really baking in the skills, the basics, whatever you need to know before you are deemed to move up, as opposed to, which is interesting dynamic, right? If you were at, your day job in the business world, are you going to ask your boss every day? So I'm sure it's just like jiu-jitsu, some folks do. When am I getting a raise? When am I getting a raise? When am I getting a promotion? When am I getting a promotion? And at some point it's like, well, I don't know whether they choose to leave on their own or not. It just becomes counterproductive. But I like that and found it helpful to read you're only at this belt once. So, take advantage of it while you're there, because it seems when you do move, the expectation shifts, for you and those around you.
Yeah.
So we've made it to the black belt. What do you all? How do you all guide your fellow black belts?
I would say the most important thing that I feel now for black belt is don't rest on your laurels. I feel like a lot of black belts that I've seen over time will stop being involved, or just stop being motivated to teach what they love. Like, I love teaching jiu-jitsu, and I'm always going to love teaching jiu-jitsu. And that motivation and that desire to continue to do that, I feel like it's going to be with me every day for the rest of my life. But I feel like sometimes I've seen some black belts that just go through the motions of teaching or running a gym or even competing, and it's always bewildered me. So I feel like black belts should continue to have that desire and enthusiasm for jiu-jitsu that they had at white belt.
And that's interesting for me, being new, to think about at that level at black belt of what's the evolution, and generally having understanding and having read about, like, it's kind of never ending. You're always evolving. But is when you make it to black belt and folks that don't rest, is that when you hone both, your own jiu-jitsu, which I'd imagine even for you all is still evolving, but also have read and heard, that's kind of when you really also are building on your instruction and your teaching. So that's part of your growth too, to not kind of, to your point, like you said, sort of rest on your laurels. And so you developing your game, even though you're a black belt, and also how you can share that knowledge with others. Is that part of your growth as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I've heard some people say, oh, well, I'm not getting the training I need to get better because I'm busy teaching or interning or doing this. And they are getting better. They just they don't feel that if they're not out there like grinding every single day on the mat, that they're not getting better. But as you get better as an instructor, as a black belt, as an owner of a gym, like you are getting better at black belt. And you might not have competed in a while. Andrew said he retired in 2015. That doesn't mean Andrew's not as good as he was in 2015. He's probably a lot better than he was. He's just not out on the competition circuit anymore. And I feel like that happens even when you start to, let's say some of our 50-year-old plus black belts who might not be on the mats as much as they were when they were 30 are definitely better than they were back then, just because they've learned when to learn things and how to be more efficient with their learning, and then also with their teaching.
That's a great point too. And for me, I'm 47, so I'm in the older club and still just at blue up level, but feeling and learning like what I should push on, what I can do, what I can't do. And I would imagine for those folks, the older black belts, they're at that point in that efficiency where they can adjust their game to fit whoever they're rolling with. Because considerations are different, right? Injuries can be more frequent, more impactful, depending on what their careers are and stuff like that. So it's interesting to hear that aspect, the age factor too, because I mean, there's no getting around it. It's a tough sport, tough martial art. Injury
for me, I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject really quickly. Like everything that Daniel said about black belt, I agree with. I think that another way to put it is that, and you hear this, it's almost like trite, but that black belt is starting over, right? And unless you've been a black belt for several years, I think you don't really recognize how much of starting over it really is. Jiu-jitsu from white to brown is building vocabulary. At the end of the day, it's describing, it's getting tools together and understanding how to use individual tools. To me, black belt is you've got a vocabulary. Now it's time to actually write a book, let's say, right? Or at least write some decent magazine articles or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was a great analogy we talked about when you were on episode 8 of the whole progression of kind of letters to words to sentences to, which again, I think is a great comparison. It is interesting to hear you say that too, of kind of starting over as a black belt, for someone that's such a high level, practitioner, is very interesting to say. Is that due to the breadth and depth of jiu-jitsu, and then now the expectations, and that there's other black belts, so now you're kind of their equivalent and still kind of I guess measuring, I don't know if it's measuring yourself against them, but with yourself and others, so that blank slate is kind of how do you keep building you up as a kind of start over a black belt?
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's psychologically helpful, I think, to look out there and say, okay, well, it takes you're a black belt for the rest of your life, right? I mean, maybe you get a red belt eventually or whatever, a corral belt, but it's like you're a black belt for the rest of your life. There's no upper limit. When you get a blue belt, you're like, okay, cool, I'll probably be a blue belt for a few years. I'll work on some things, I'll get better, I'll get improved. When you're a black belt, that's it. That's all you get, So I think for me, it's sort of, oh, okay, this is where everything kind of begins. It kind of starts here, Everything leading up to this point was just preparing, and now I have to actually, I'm able to learn. On the other hand, it's definitely a continuum, but I think that people who regard black belt as the end are fools. It's just silly to me, unless that's just kind of like they can check off the I did jiu-jitsu and box in their, personal bucket list or something.
Yeah, it is interesting. And for the black belts, what do they say the average is 10 years or so, right? Is kind of the standard answer that I've heard.
Right.
Sorry, I think we lost you for a segment there.
I hate that. Sorry.
That's all right. I bet it was an outstanding answer to that discussion.
Oh, wait. Whatever you're thinking at home was the best answer to that question. That was exactly what I said.
That's right. That's awesome. So we made it to black belt. We're talking about the future coming up in a couple hours, which is awesome. I think, I'm always amazed when having a good discussion with good people, how fast it goes. But also thinking about the future for Revolution. So you mentioned, the kind of post-US grappling of having in-house tournaments, depending on comfort and safety and those kind of things. What are some, unless there's, any kind of secret sauce to give away, what is each of your vision? I guess I'll ask kind of twofold. One for Revolution itself, and then two for Jiu-Jitsu kind of as a whole. What are y'all's thoughts, if you have some on Revolution, I would imagine, but for Jiu-Jitsu as well?
Daniel, you want to?
Yeah, well, I'll start with, for Revolution, we would, from day one, I was always interested in making this, obviously, the best Jiu-Jitsu academy in the city, in the area, regionally, and hopefully on the East Coast. Ambitious, because we would love to open more Revolution academies. And similar to the Gracie Baja idea of having gyms around the country and becoming a great gym, but that would be the long-term goal for Revolution. Right now, it's about making this academy and our academy in Ashland and all future academies as great as possible. For Jiu-Jitsu in the long run, I would love to just increase people participating in Jiu-Jitsu. It's a great sport. I still feel like it is very niche, and I do see a lot more people starting Jiu-Jitsu classes and learning Jiu-Jitsu, which is great. I don't think it's to the point where it'll be an Olympic sport in the future, but I do believe it'll be something that can be as big as Taekwondo was at its zenith. And hopefully it'll stand the test of time.
That's a great thing. Talking about that it's niche, right? Because I think to those of us that practice it, it's not at all. But I forget sometimes, one being a nerd and trying to weld it into conversations when it comes up or something, or I'll have a sweatshirt on. It's like, oh, you do this. But how when you're into something, particularly jiu-jitsu, it seems like everyone knows about it, and then surprisingly, a lot of people do not, which is cool. So that would be pretty awesome to see Revolution clubs all over the country, if not maybe overseas someday, huh? And then to see folks and when you mentioned more folks practicing and doing the art in particular, it made me think about law enforcement and the benefit of that and the control of it. Which I know there's various programs of different instructors doing those kind of things. But it seems like if more folks would kind of choke each other and do joint locks, probably the rest of the day would be a lot easier.
Yeah, but just the enjoyment you have doing jiu-jitsu. You always go into jiu-jitsu having a good time, and then you leave jiu-jitsu having an even better time. Or even if you go into a jiu-jitsu class and you've been stressed out because of anything that's happened in life, you usually don't leave the academy in that same level of stress. You usually have gotten rid of that and you feel good.
That's a great point. Great point. I would imagine, Andrew, in line with with Daniel talking about the future, again, it would be awesome to see a lot of those. What are your thoughts on the future of jiu-jitsu itself?
Well, that's a good one. The jiu-jitsu itself, I've got a pretty good perspective now. I've been paying attention to it some form or fashion for a quarter of a century, and I've seen is the story of technology. As technology improves and gets integrated into our lives, so does jiu-jitsu to a degree. And this involves stuff like streaming video services, where you can just get a la carte. You can actually purchase stuff. You can look up stuff for free on YouTube. You can use BJJ Path, right? You can actually there wasn't a BJJ Path 25 years ago. There was Black Belt Magazine, and you would have like a black and white article with terrible pictures of a judo pin, and that would be all you get grappling wise for that month, and then you wait until next month and you get something from a jiu-jitsu article like that was very difficult to see what was going on, but it was like at least you had something that you could work on. And man, everybody worked on whatever that was too, Now it's like, you think about how quickly information itself spreads.
Yep.
And then think about how quickly information about jiu-jitsu can spread. And I think that's what we're seeing. So I think for me, jiu-jitsu going forward involves a lot more integration with technology and a lot more people doing it. We've seen an exponential spread of jiu-jitsu once we saw it when jiu-jitsu became on everybody's radar in the very beginning, or at least on some people's radar here in the U.S.
Yeah, the internet, the streaming service, videos like y'all put out has definitely expanded. I would imagine helped with that growth that we talked about at the beginning of the exponential kind of 30 to 100 to 200 to 400 students, which is pretty awesome.
And then until the UFC was on cable TV with The Ultimate Fighter, and we've seen these little jumps up, and every time there's a jump up, there's like 10 times as many people doing it as they were before. So whatever the next great jump up is, if there is such a jump up, is going to be enormous. Imagine 10 times as many people doing jiu-jitsu in another decade as they're doing it today. And we've got, tens of millions of people in the U.S. doing this stuff. I think that's realistic because of kids, personally.
All right.
We're seeing kids that their parents only want them to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. We didn't see that so much 20 years ago or even 15 years ago. But now you've seen kids that grew up showing their kids the UFC, right? Or they grew up watching UFC, or they grew up watching The Ultimate Fighter on cable TV. The Ultimate Fighter was a breakthrough for exposure to MMA, and as a result, of course, of an exposure to jiu-jitsu. So anyway, I see deep integration with technology. I see a learning experience that's going to be a lot more robust for people. You can learn from like anywhere in the world. We already experimented a great deal with that during the pandemic. Video instruction has a long way to go, I think, before it's the same as in-person instruction.
Well, definitely on Andrew's point there, if there was only a book that would express the thoughts of jiu-jitsu black belts that was interactive with techniques, that would be great.
It would be. Daniel, do you know of such a book? And if you do, where could people find it?
And I believe they could find it on Kindle. And then, pretty simple, the Wit and Wisdom of the little gym that could, and also get BJJ Path for free so that you could link between both of them.
That is an outstanding resource that I highly recommend. It's super interactive, comprehensive. It's got great information. And for the folks that read that book, that go to bjjpath.com and say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. What is the best way for them to get in touch with you all at Revolution?
The best way would go to our website, revolutionbjj.com. You'll find out a lot of information about us there. There's a lot of links to videos, to merchandise, to our schedule, to our classes, our bios. You can personally always contact me, Daniel, at revolutionbjj.com for any students who are interested in starting with us. And then a lot of times, if you'd like to contact Andrew, the best way is to go to BJJ Path because it's very simple. He's very interactive with the students there.
You can also email me directly at andrew@revolutionbjj.com if you're not on there already.
That's awesome. We'll put up the links when I do the posts for the episode, both where folks can get the book, go to the Revolution website, go to the Path, email you all. Thank you all both so much for sharing your knowledge, one in the book, with me personally, with the folks listening to this. I really value your perspectives. I know the other folks that listening do too. And it's been a good couple hours of us chatting and you all sharing your knowledge from the decades of experience that you all have with jiu-jitsu.
Great. Well, thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this show. Again, we'll link to this episode. If you want to see more episodes or listen to more episodes, go to peopleprocessprogress.com. People Process Progress on Instagram, Facebook. That's the socials. But go to the website. We have links where you can subscribe and follow as well. So thanks again, Dano and Andrew. And for everybody out there listening, we appreciate every listen, every download. Stay safe, wash your hands, and Godspeed.